So I'm going to show you what it's like to actually witness a WannaCry infection, and really how the ransomware will go about its work of encrypting a user's files. And you probably would have seen a number of screenshots of this on Twitter and in the media, but let's actually have a look at it live. So this is a virtual machine running in a completely isolated environment, so it has no network connections. And so this test environment allows me to investigate and test various forms of ransomware to understand how they work and to make sure that we have specific ways of being able to protect and recover from them. So in this little test environment, I've got a number of documents, and these are just test documents. It's not real live data, but this represents potentially a user's files, their business data, and the data that they're using and working with on their system. You might be noticed I'm actually running Windows 10. Regardless of the operating system of Windows, the attack works in exactly the same way. The only difference is the way that it actually gets onto the system. So this particular server potentially would have been a bit better protected against this kind of attack, because Microsoft already had included changes to the way that this bug and this vulnerability was used in Windows 10. But nevertheless, what we're going to focus on here is what the actual attack looks like. This is the WannaCry payload. It's an executable file. It's just over 3 megabytes in size, and so this is an exe, and this is the file that was then delivered onto a user's system by the Eternal Blue tool, and then given execution privileges by the other NSA tools used as part of the overall attack. In a lot of ransomware attacks, they try and entice the user into running this payload. For WannaCry, users did not have to actually click and run anything because it already had execution privileges. But I'd typically expect a ransomware payload to have a name something like this. So a spreadsheet, perhaps with a name like this. And so this might have been received as an email attachment, and trying to entice the user to think, oh, what was the boss paid last year? What did my colleague's bonus, or what was my colleague's bonus like this month, and so on. So typically there's some element of social engineering used to try and trick users into running the payload. Now, obviously, for WannaCry, the attackers didn't actually need to use this type of social engineering, because they already had a way of actually getting their payload onto a victim's machine and running it. But this is the executable, and if I was a user, I was tricked into actually running and trying to open this spreadsheet. An educated user is going to notice that that is not actually the icon for a spreadsheet, that's the icon for an executable. However, if they're running it from an email attachment or a browser download, it may not necessarily have that exact same icon, and obviously there are plenty of ways to spoof and fool an icon as well. So that's not necessarily a guaranteed way of knowing that what you're opening is actually what you think it is. But in the case of WannaCrypt and WannaCry, the payload was already delivered and then was given execution privileges. So let's go ahead and run it. It's now installing itself on the system, and once it's finished installing itself on the system, this normally takes a few seconds, it'll then go and start encrypting files. And you can see it's already started this process, so it's now encrypting all of my files and data. When it's finished encrypting it, it'll then remove the originals. You'll notice it's already changed my desktop background, and once it's finished encrypting all of the files on the system, it will then display its ransomware message and demand ransom. So you can see how quickly this attack propagates. Already it has encrypted all of the files on my system. It's now scanning the rest of my file system, and it's now going to start out to scan out the rest of the network, creating those random IP addresses and pinging out on them, trying to cross-infect. Now that it's finished infecting all of my files, it's now ready to demand its ransom. This type of ransomware message is fairly typical for these types of attacks. So we can see this is the WannaDecryptor tool. This is actually the tool they provide for you to get your files back, and the instructions they give you and help you to pay them in Bitcoin. They've helpfully translated this into a number of languages, and so regardless of where they were potentially getting this attack and landing this attack, they're able to provide a little bit of user support to help their victims pay them money. Here we can see the timer showing how long we've got left before the ransom is doubled from $300 to $600. And we can also see a timer showing us exactly when that that global ransomware encryption key is going to be deleted, and all of our files will be permanently inaccessible. So again, you've probably seen screenshots of this. You've probably seen this in the news and the media. But That really is all there is to it. It's now up to me as a user to try and decide what I'm going to do. So what are your options if you suffer a ransomware attack? Well, option number one is to pay the ransom. There are a number of problems with this, however. The moment you pay the ransom, you're expecting a criminal to stay true to their word. And as glamorous as Hollywood might make things like Ocean's 11 look, expecting a criminal to stand by their word and actually give you their data back is, sometimes we have seen in some cases criminals have returned data. And in the particular instance of WannaCry, most users have been actually receiving their decryption keys to actually get their data back. But previous studies have shown that in some cases, only 25% of victims who actually pay the ransom actually get their files back. If you look at the overall kind of policies of a number of governments, they refuse to negotiate with terrorists and criminals, for the exact reason that it sets a precedence. And the moment any victim pays a ransom, they are potentially identifying themselves as a future mark for other attacks. Simply paying the ransom will allow you to unlock your files, but it doesn't necessarily remove the ransomware from your system. And given that your system has been compromised with the various bugs and backdoors have now been installed, we could potentially pay the ransom, get our files back, and then a week later, the criminals could reinfect us, given that they are still inside of our system. So simply paying the ransom might potentially be considered by some a last resort, but generally it's not recommended to pay the ransom, because even if you do, you may not get your files back, and you're still at risk of future attacks. What are your other options? Well, tell the security services, log a report with the police. There is very little that security services and police forces can do about these types of attack. It's very, very difficult to track down the criminals because of the way they protect themselves with using Tor backdoors and accepting payment via Bitcoin, which is very difficult to then track. So it's very, although most security professionals would definitely recommend opening up a case with your local police force just so they're aware of it, there is very little that security services and the police force can do to help you get your data back. The only secure way of recovering your files is by having consistent, reliable backups. That allows you to then roll back to your previous backups, recover your data without actually having to pay the ransom. And so you have to consider how often are you backing up? Because if you're only backing up once a day, then potentially you're going to lose a few hours worth of data. If your last backup was at midnight and you've been infected by this at 10 in the morning, then you've got a few hours of working data you're potentially going to lose. However, if you're taking backups less frequently than once a day, you're potentially looking at days worth of data you're going to lose. And this was the exact case with WannaCry. The actual attack took place on Friday and Saturday last week, and a lot of users were then coming back to their workstations on Monday morning and logging on and finding out that over the last few days they were potentially looking at losing all of that data. It's also important to consider exactly how often you are testing your backups. Because we find a lot of organizations have a backup solution in place that they've never tried or tested, and then when they actually do suffer an attack, they come back to try and recover their data and find that actually their backups have been corrupted as well, either knocked out by the ransomware attack itself or simply were never viable in the first place. So our advice as a vendor is obviously to have reliable, resilient backups. And over the next 5 or 10 minutes, we're going to take a quick look at best practice in terms of protecting your environments, because that is the only surefire way of making sure that you can recover in the event of a ransomware attack like WannaCry. So that was a live demo of WannaCrypt and the WannaCry attack. As I mentioned, what is the best protection? Business continuity is the concept of taking backups and moving that one step further to providing a full suite of tools to very quickly recover data, either individual files or systems in their entirety. It provides you with disaster recovery in case something goes wrong. Because ransomware, as we've seen over the last few days, isn't really a matter of if, but when. It's a bit like car crashes. It doesn't matter how careful of a driver you are, even if you abide by all the traffic laws, wear a seatbelt and drive responsibly, you can't take into account the actions of others. And attacks like WannaCry have shown that even if you have educated users and fairly robust networks and so on, there are still potential ways for them to actually get into your systems. You look at some of the organizations that were infected, particularly organizations like maybe like Renault or Nissan, big world-class vendors. They have large IT budgets. And you can imagine that they probably were under the impression that they had fantastic IT security, but they were still vulnerable to these types of attack. I'm going to take you through a simple file recovery, but also a full system recovery, and the types of tools that are potentially at your disposal in the event of a ransomware attack. This is the interface of our backup and business continuity appliance. And in this particular environment, you can see I'm protecting a number of systems. One of my systems is actually not doing all that well at the moment because it's been infected with ransomware. This type of system allows us to capture backups very, very frequently, and using the technology I've already described with inverse chain, it's highly efficient in the way that it's able to capture backups and storing them on the local system. I'm going to go through to the Protect tab. I'm going to have a look at some of my systems, and let's just sort these by the last error so that we can actually take a look at one of these systems that has signs of ransomware. So this particular server is being backed up every 30 minutes throughout the working day. So from 8 AM to 6 PM, we're capturing a backup. If I click on Manage Recovery Points, we'll actually be able to see the backup points for this particular server. And we'll be able to see exactly when a ransomware attack struck this particular system. So we can see here are our backup points for the day, every half an hour, starting at 8 AM throughout the day. And so the recovery point objectives for this particular server is very low because we're capturing a backup point every 30 minutes. And the ransomware detection feature in the product has noticed that this particular backup at 2:30 PM has signs of ransomware. So I'm a systems administrator. I've received this ransomware alert that one of my systems has potentially been infected. What am I going to do about it? Well, coming through to the Restore tab of the product, I'm then able to select this system that's been infected with the ransomware. And these are the different recovery types that the Cirrus Backup and Business Continuity Solutions provides. First of all, we can do a basic file restore. And you'll notice that I'm able to select the backup points that are held on the system, and I've got a large number of backup points as part of my local backup and retention policy. And it's notifying me that this particular backup point has got signs of ransomware. If I wanted to recover my data, it's just a matter of selecting my last known good backup point, so in this instance, my 2 PM backup point, and starting my file restore. By checking this box, I'll be able to browse through the file system of my server directly through the interface of the product, just like a kind of an FTP server. And here are all of my files ready for me to recover quickly without having to pay the ransom. So a straightforward file restore to get individual files back is very quick and easy to do. However, what I'm also interested in is minimizing the downtime. This server that's been infected with ransomware, the first thing I'd probably do as a network administrator is to pull the network plugs, the network from that server. So if it's a VM, disconnect it from my network. If it's a physical server, go and remove its Ethernet cables to really stop it from cross-infecting any other systems and to make sure that I'm able to recover it. So to minimize the downtime, I'm able to leverage the built-in hypervisor in the Cirrus appliance. Again, it's notifying me that I got a backup point with ransomware. I'm going to select my backup point before the ransomware struck. And what we're going to do is convert this into a virtual machine and run that on my network to pick up where my infected server left off. I've hit the Start VM button. What the product is going to do is clone out the backup point that we've selected from the backup chain so we don't overwrite any data. It's then going to prepare that backup point's virtual machine and then power on that virtual machine. So there we go. This process normally takes us 6 to 10 seconds. This VM is now booting up using the built-in hypervisor and the compute and memory resources provided by the appliance. If I click through on this live thumbnail, it'll actually open up a console connection to this server, and this server is now booting up. In a moment or two's time, it will have finished booting. I can then go and access it, bring back my applications, and I'm able to recover that server in its entirety, really in just a matter of minutes. And this is really what transforms a Datto Cirrus appliance from just being backup into true business continuity. Because we have the ability to very quickly recover a system both on the appliance and also in the Datto cloud, we are then able to very rapidly minimize the downtime. We can also use the built-in hypervisor to investigate the extent of a ransomware attack. And we have a number of other tools that then allow you to completely re-image your server using a bare metal restore, or if it's a VM, to take your last known good snapshot of that VM and pass it back over to your hypervisor to get your data back into your production workload. So using these tools, you can minimize the effects of a ransomware attack, minimize the downtime, and get your data back quickly without paying the ransom. So this server is still finishing its boot process. In another minute or two's time, that would have finished. I'll be able to go and access it. But you can see that the power of this type of solution, that inverse chain technology we use to build our backup chains, allows us to very quickly rebuild images of servers and to then boot them on the product using our instant virtualization technology. If I come back through to my Protect tab, we'll be able to see the testing of backups in play. So if we find my system that's been infected with ransomware and look at my recovery points, we'll be able to see how often this particular server was tested for backups. And adding all of these ingredients together really shows me that, or it shows that this type of solution is really what's required to help protect you from ransomware. So here we can see that I've got a successful screenshot verified indicator. If I actually click on this icon here, it'll show me the screenshot of this server. So here we go at 19 minutes past 12 earlier today. I tested the backup point that I captured for that particular server, and I was successfully able to boot that server as a virtual machine. This actual screenshot itself isn't obviously of much use because it's just an image of the server as it was. But what it represents is that I've got a known backup point that I could definitely recover my data from as part of this backup chain. So that is a quick overview of how we can potentially recover from a ransomware attack in the event of an encryption attack such as WannaCry. So that was a live recovery demo and showing you how you can get back to business inside of a couple of minutes, recovering your files or recovering a system in its entirety.